This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture.
And welcome to the City of God podcast, where we are weekly talking about today's biggest cultural issues, all through the lens of God's infallible word. My name is Rob Pacienza, and we are joined today by the one and only George Barna. George Barna is an incredible resource and asset to the North American church. He is currently the Director of Research at the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University. George, so good to have you on the City of God podcast.
It's great to be back, Rob. Thank you.
So let's dive right into worldview. You have spent your career researching the area of worldview, particularly worldview in the North American church. Explain to our audience what a worldview is, why it matters, and why you dedicated your career to this.
Everybody has a worldview. Really, the only question is, which worldview do you have? And so a worldview is essentially the decision-making filter that every person has. We're trying to figure out who we are. How does the world work? How do I fit within it? Where am I going? What kind of life do I want to live? How can I live it? Those are all worldview questions because they're based on basic life principles, philosophical principles, if you will. And so when we're trying to answer those questions, we've got a lot of places that are offering solutions to us. You know, Marxists, postmodernists, secular humanists, Eastern mystics, Satanists, all kinds of people. But then there's also the Bible, which offers answers to those questions as well. So a biblical worldview is one option that people can choose from. Now, in America, if you look over the course of our history, of course, we haven't had this kind of research since the beginning, but it appears that early on, a large share of Americans had a biblical worldview. Every decision they were making went back to the Bible and said, what does the Bible teach me about this? And therefore, how should I act? And the connection between beliefs and behavior is important because you do what you believe. So what you believe matters because it determines your lifestyle. And ultimately, if we want to be disciples of Jesus, you can't live like Jesus unless you think like Jesus. So we've got to get the beliefs right. Traditionally, we've thought a lot like Jesus. In America today, we don't. Only 4% of adults in America have a biblical worldview. Only about 1 out of every 10 people who theologically we would say, yeah, they qualify technically as a born-again Christian, only 1 out of 10 of them have a biblical worldview. And all of these things and other things help explain why in America today, there are only about 3% of adults who, using Jesus' criteria in the scriptures for what makes a disciple, only 3% who are probably disciples.
It's amazing. So let's get practical. If we could do a quick exercise.
Yeah.
So you take the issue of purpose, human purpose. Everybody in the world wants purpose. They want to wake up in the morning and know they're going somewhere. They have distinct purpose in their life. So what would be the difference between, say, secular humanism and their understanding of purpose and how the Bible informs our worldview concerning purpose?
A person who believes in the Bible would say that my purpose, I've actually got kind of two purposes. One is the common purpose all of us share, which is to know, love, and serve God with all our heart, mind, strength, and soul. But then as I get to know God, as I commit my life to Him, He will give me a particular path to run on, which uses the special gifts He's given me, the spiritual gifts He's endowed me with, the skills that I've acquired, the knowledge I learned from my education. And all of those things can put me on a path to have things that I do that honor Him and advance His kingdom. Now, a secular humanist would say, well, first of all, the problem is there's no such thing as God. So you don't have to worry about that end of it. But we know that science can answer all questions. So what's most important for you in your life, your purpose really is to understand what science teaches us about where the world came from, how the world works, what a human being is, and how you can actually make the most of your life within those boundaries.
Now, you've not only researched worldview, generally speaking, but you also really have gone in and studied worldview with the next generation. You wrote the book, Raising Spiritual Champions. Tell us a little bit about that book and what you found in your research.
Rob, we did 7 original research projects just for that book. So we researched parents, we researched pastors of churches, we went and studied children's ministries at churches, we researched kids, we researched teenagers. So all of these things together helped us to understand why it is that we have so few young children being raised up to be disciples of Jesus. The book is all about not just explaining the problem, it's mostly about what do we do about the problem. So what does a parent do if they want to raise a spiritual champion? It's a whole section, 3 sections in the book. The middle section is all about that. What can a parent do in terms of their plan, in terms of their priorities, in terms of the beliefs that they need to teach their children, the kinds of behaviors that should come out of those beliefs, and how you evaluate how well your child's doing at becoming more Christ-like. So that's really what the book is geared to doing, is to waking up parents, giving them the tools they need to be more effective, but also helping anybody who wants to influence children to understand these basic principles and opportunities, whether it's children's pastors, whether it's grandparents, whether it's coaches, teachers, doesn't matter. These principles will work for anybody who has influence on children.
George, when we think of worldview development, the next generation, I think there's a lot of people out there inside the church that think this is something that you engage with the next generation, maybe when they're in high school or college. But all of your research says, no, that a worldview is developed within a child much earlier. Explain to our audience about worldview development with the next generation and what your research tells us when it's actually being formed.
Yeah, because a worldview is essentially the filter that somebody has to make decisions. And from a very early age, 15 to 18 months, we start making decisions for ourselves that are going to affect us for the rest of our lives. We're going to learn from those situations and to say, okay, that's good, this didn't work, those types of things. And so we're constantly creating this philosophy of life, which is what a worldview is, to help us figure out more about ourselves, our place in the world, how we can have the kind of life we think we should and want to have. And so as we've studied that, and a lot of institutes have come along afterwards now and verify it, a worldview starts developing at 15 to 18 months of age and is fully formed by the age of 13.
It's amazing.
And that's why the most important minister in any church is the children's pastor, because they're the ones who are shaping that worldview that's going to determine whether they love Jesus, whether they commit their life to God, whether they're going to live in concert with God's principles, all of these things and more. You know, the senior pastor likes to think, oh, I'm the one shaping all that. Too late, buddy. It's already dried cement. You know, it's the children's pastor who has the wet cement and ought to be working with parents to help shape what that child's going to become. Biblically, it's not the children's pastor's job to spiritually raise the child. It's that pastor's job to come alongside the parents who have been called by God to raise up those children to know, love, and serve God.
The parents are the chief shepherds of that child's heart and soul.
They have to be. And you go back to Deuteronomy 6 and you look at all kinds of things that the Bible says. You've got to be talking with your kids about this every day.
Yeah.
You've got to be modeling it for them every day. You've got to be arguing about these truths every day. Yeah. You've got to display them in the marketplace every day. So that's how it works.
So for the parent that's out there going, how in the world would I talk to my 2-year-old, 5-year-old, even 9-year-old about some of these biblical truths, developing a biblical worldview? What can parents or what should parents be talking about specifically with their child in this pursuit of developing a biblical worldview?
In the book, I talk about something that I discovered through the research called the 7 cornerstones of a biblical worldview. And if parents were to start there and lay the foundation with those 7 things, it would go a long way toward the child having a full biblical worldview. And they're simple things like understanding God does exist, understanding the nature of God, understanding that we're sinners from birth. That's part of our DNA. But there's an antidote to sin. Jesus is the antidote, explaining why and how that happens. Understanding that there is absolute moral truth, even though your friends, your teachers, and your media exposure is going to teach you otherwise. It does exist. And how do we know what those truths are? Sharing with them the Bible, where the Bible came from, how we know the Bible is true, what we need to be doing in terms of personally studying and learning from the Bible, realizing that success is not about going out and getting the best job, the biggest paycheck. It's all about consistently obeying God's principles. So these are the kinds of things that parents need to be doing with their children from a very early age. And you're not going to have a deep theological conversation with them, but you're going to encourage them to do certain things. You can explain why in a very simple manner they should do those things, and you can celebrate it when they do that. Give them that encouragement so that they continually do that, because they'll react to that kind of encouragement.
Yeah. George, we see the numbers and they're sobering. The amount of children that are raised in the church that are walking away from their faith sometime during their college career. But there is a remnant. There is a group that's not walking away from the faith. Is it fair to say, or fair to make any connection between those that are staying grounded and staying connected to the faith and growing up in a church and a home that valued biblical worldview development?
So far, I've found two things that seem to correlate with kids sticking with their faith. Number one is that they had at least one Christian parent, hopefully two, but at least one, who was consistent in teaching and modeling biblical truth for them while they were under the guidance of that parent or those parents. Second thing was that they tend to go to schools that are more Bible-centered. It's hard to do it when all you do is go to public schools.
Sure.
We found that those who are homeschooled actually have a much greater likelihood of sticking with it.
Wow.
So those are two things we've discovered. Oddly, we found that there hasn't been much of a correlation between going to church and sticking with the Christian faith. But I believe that's because we also find in our research that most Christian churches have children's ministries and even youth groups, teen ministries, that aren't biblically based.
It's amazing.
And so, when you look at the churches that are biblically based, from birth to when a child leaves the church, that does make a difference.
It's a sobering wake-up call to the North American church. Yeah. Now, how about for parents on the other end? They don't have little children at home, but they're getting ready to send their kids off to college, some of them being secular college campuses. What should parents be talking to their students about, their children about, that are graduating from high school and getting ready to go off to college?
Again, I'd go back to those basics, those 7 cornerstones, and make sure that they own that, because when they get on campus, it's going to be challenged every day.
Yeah.
And so they've got to be ready for that.
What are some of the things that are being challenged on a college campus?
Truth is the big thing.
Yeah.
Where even I'm finding at a lot of Christian colleges, not the one I teach at, thankfully, that's why I'm there, but at many Christian colleges, what I'm finding is there's a significant share of students at those Christian colleges don't believe there is absolute moral truth. They don't believe the Bible can be trusted to teach absolute moral truth. And so those are the kinds of conversations they've got to be prepared for. When they make unusual choices in the eyes of their colleagues, they've got to be prepared to give a defense for, the hope that lies within them. Help explain why they did that, why they believe the Bible teaches that's right, why they believe they can trust the Bible. Critical for any student going off.
George, last question. In all of your research, is there anything you're finding that gives you hope for America?
Different kind of research. As I study the Bible, the thing that gives me great hope is realizing God never waited till he had a majority to transform any culture. He doesn't need that. He can transform it without us if he so chooses. He would prefer to do it with us. He always uses a remnant of people who are sold out to him. So even if we get down to just, currently if we have 3% who are disciples, he can literally turn the world upside down with that 3%. So I'm encouraged by the fact that God continues to live. He cares. He loves us. He'll use us. And I can't wait to get in the fight.
We need to have a long view of history.
Absolutely.
Well, George, thank you so much for your time, and God bless you in your pursuit of waking up the church to the importance of a biblical worldview.
Thank you, Rob.
I want to thank you for joining us today on this podcast and this special episode with George Barna. If you were encouraged, inspired, informed by this episode, we pray that you would pass it along to a family member or friend or anyone who wants to tackle today's biggest cultural issues through the lens of God's infallible word. I want to thank you once again for joining us. We'll see you next time on the City of God.
The City of God podcast is produced by Coral Ridge Ministries and made in partnership with the Institute for Faith and Culture. Visit us at cityofgodpodcast.com to access all of our previous episodes. You can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or anywhere you get podcasts. A full video version of this podcast is available on YouTube. This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture.